The morning light crept through the lace curtains, spilling across the worn oak table where Arthur Wallace sat, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. The house was quiet, too quiet, save for the ticking of the wall clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. His daughter's wedding was 2 days away, yet his world felt still, like the pause before the weight of something unseen. He had been up since before dawn, as always. Old habits died hard. The smell of cement clung to him no matter how many years had passed since retirement. It hid in the lines of his skin, in the calluses of his palms, the kind of scent that no soap could wash away. Once that smell meant pride. Now, with Skylar marrying into the Coleman family, it only reminded him how far apart their worlds had drifted. Outside, the sun caught on the petals of his rose bushes. Martha's roses. He still called them that. He had planted them 30 years ago when his wife was alive, promising her he'd keep them blooming every spring. They had been her favorite. Every morning, he watered them carefully, the way one handles fragile things. Today, he whispered to them as he poured. "Almost ready, my love. Our girl's getting married." He smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. The air smelled of damp soil and the faint tang of iron from the old watering can. Somewhere beyond the fence, laughter echoed from the neighbors, a reminder that the world kept moving, even when one's heart stood still. When he heard the crunch of tires on gravel, he straightened his back and wiped his hands on his faded overalls. The sleek black car in the driveway looked out of place beside his weathered porch. Skylar stepped out, heels clicking against the cement. She was radiant, hair pinned, nails perfect, the faint shimmer of luxury following her like perfume. "Dad," she said, giving him a quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I just came to drop off the invitation list. The planner needs your confirmation for the head count." Arthur nodded, taking the envelope carefully, afraid the dirt from his fingers might stain the gold lettering. "You didn't have to drive all the way here for that. You could have called." She laughed softly. "Devin said the same thing. But I wanted to make sure you're not overworking yourself before the big day." He chuckled. "I'm not the one getting married, sweetheart. You just enjoy yourself." She looked around the yard, her gaze lingering on his work boots by the steps, the rusted wheelbarrow, the half-finished patch of cement near the shed. The scent of concrete dust drifted faintly in the warm breeze. Skylar wrinkled her nose. "Dad, you still mix that stuff out here?" she asked. He nodded. "Just a little patching work. Keeps me busy." There was a pause. Then she said it, lightly, without malice, yet it cut deeper than any insult ever could. "Dad, you smell like cement. It's kind of embarrassing, you know." The words hung in the air, sharp and bright. For a moment, Arthur didn't understand. Then the silence filled in the meaning she didn't say aloud, that he didn't belong in her new world of linen suits and champagne. He tried to laugh it off. "Guess it never really leaves you, huh? 40 years of mixing concrete, it becomes part of your blood." But his voice cracked at the edges. Skylar didn't notice. Her phone buzzed, and she was already turning away, smiling at some message. "Anyway, I have to run. The designer's waiting for me downtown. Don't forget the list, okay?" She kissed his cheek, a soft, distracted brush, and hurried back to the car. Arthur stood there, the scent of her perfume fading into exhaust fumes. He stared at his hands, at the gray dust caught in the lines of his skin. For the first time, the smell he once carried with pride made him ache with shame. He turned back toward the roses. The sun was higher now, the day bright and merciless. He bent down, resumed watering, but the rhythm had changed. Slower, heavier. In the distance, the sound of her car disappeared down the road, leaving only the ticking of the sprinkler and the whisper of his own breath. When the can ran dry, he sat on the porch steps and watched the last drops fall onto the soil. The roses shimmered red under the sunlight, their petals trembling in the wind, like a promise kept too long. Arthur exhaled, long and low. Tomorrow, he would finish the cement patch behind the shed. After all, something should stay solid, even when everything else begins to crack. The morning after Skylar's visit, the house felt heavier, as if her words had seeped into the walls overnight. Arthur woke before sunrise, his back stiff, his mind restless. The faint scent of cement still lingered on his clothes, and though he'd scrubbed his hands raw, it clung to him like memory. He sat at the same oak table where stacks of receipts and invoices lay scattered. They told a story more painful than any wound, a record of everything he'd given up for his daughter's dream. The Grand Magnolia Estate, $25,000 deposit. Vanessa Ray Bridal Couture, $8,500 for the gown. Catering, photography, band, floral arrangements, another $40,000 combined. His life savings reduced to a handful of printed papers. Arthur picked up the pawn ticket from the small box beside him. Wallace Jewelry and Loans. The number 1327 was scrawled in blue ink. Inside that pawnshop, locked behind a metal gate, sat Martha's wedding ring, a simple gold band with a tiny diamond that once caught the light when she laughed. He had promised never to part with it. But when the florist doubled her price, he didn't think twice. He had sold the last piece of land he owned, too, the half-acre lot near the highway, the one his father left him. The land where he'd once dreamed of building a small workshop. The deed now belonged to a real estate developer, and Arthur hadn't looked back. Or maybe he had every day since. He told himself it was worth it. Skylar deserved the best. She always had. He wanted her to walk down the aisle without ever knowing what it cost him. That was a father's duty, to bleed quietly. The phone rang. A bright, unfamiliar tone echoed through the small kitchen. He picked it up, expecting Skylar. Instead, a young man's polished voice filled the line. "Mr. Wallace? This is Devon. Just confirming tomorrow's tasting at the estate." Arthur smiled faintly. "Ah, yes. I'll be there at 10 sharp. There was a pause. Then laughter in the background, muffled but audible. Another voice. Skylar's. "Devon, don't make him nervous," she teased. Devon chuckled. "Nervous? Nah. Just making sure your dad remembers. You know, with all those retirement years behind him." Arthur's grip on the receiver tightened. "I can still manage a calendar, son." Devon's tone softened, but the amusement didn't leave. "Of course, sir. Just a joke." The call ended politely enough, but the sound of their laughter lingered long after. He stared at the phone, his reflection ghosted in its black surface, an old man with tired eyes, clutching at pieces of pride that no one else seemed to see. By afternoon, Arthur drove to the estate for the tasting. The Grand Magnolia stood like a castle, white pillars gleaming against the bright Georgia sun. Staff hurried about with clipboards and trays of champagne. The air smelled of perfume and money, not the kind of air Arthur was used to breathing. He spotted Skylar across the courtyard, radiant in a pale blue dress. Devon stood beside her, whispering something that made her laugh. Arthur approached, adjusting his worn jacket, his shoes polished until the leather cracked. "Dad, you made it," Skylar said, hugging him lightly before glancing at his scuffed sleeves. "Next time, maybe wear the gray suit, okay?" Devon smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "We're going for a more refined aesthetic for the photos, sir. You understand." Arthur nodded, though his chest ached. He sat quietly at the tasting table while waiters presented dishes with names he couldn't pronounce. Devon and Skylar chatted with the coordinator, discussing crystal centerpieces and imported wine. Their laughter drifted above him, polite and detached. For the first time, Arthur felt invisible, like a relic placed in the wrong century. Every word, every smile reminded him of what he wasn't. As he left the estate, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirrored glass doors, a man built by labor, standing amid silk and marble. He had given everything, blood, land, love, and somehow it still wasn't enough. He walked back to his truck slowly, the smell of roses from the nearby archway mingling with a faint trace of cement on his hands. Beneath the beauty, something inside him began to harden, quiet, heavy, and unyielding. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would water the roses again. But the thought no longer brought peace. It only reminded him how fragile dreams can be when bought with blood. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that warned of rain. Arthur stood at his kitchen sink, rinsing out the old coffee mug he'd used for 20 years. His hands were cracked and red from work, his knuckles stiff. Through the window, he could see the roses swaying under a light breeze. They were in full bloom, a sea of red against the dull sky. He needed something to quiet his thoughts. The taste of last night's humiliation still clung to him. The estate, Devon's laughter, Skylar's polite distance, all of it replayed in his mind. He took the shears from the hook by the door and stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air. The scent of damp earth met him, clean, honest, grounding. He knelt near the first bush and began trimming the wilted stems, letting the rhythmic snip of metal soothe him. Each cut was sharp and precise, like a craftsman working on something that mattered. As he worked, a familiar sound reached him, the hum of a car pulling up the driveway next door, the Coleman's property. He didn't look up. He knew that sound now. Devon's silver Mercedes always announced itself. Then came laughter, Skylar's, bright and nervous. Another voice followed, older, sharper. "Evelyn Coleman," Arthur murmured under his breath. He'd never met her properly, though Skylar had described her as refined. He moved closer to the fence line that separated the two houses, his shears still in hand. The roses grew thick there, climbing along the wooden slats beneath Skylar's bedroom window. He could hear the voices clearly now. "I'm telling you, darling, it's not too late to reconsider," Evelyn was saying. Her tone was sweet, but edged like a knife. "Your father's. Well, he's sweet, I suppose. But these kinds of families, they pull you down. Always needing help, always clinging to pride." Skylar's soft laugh followed. "He's not like that. He's just old-fashioned." "Old-fashioned," Evelyn scoffed. "He smells like a construction site. Devon told me he came to the tasting looking like he'd just patched a sidewalk." Arthur froze, one hand gripping the rose stem. There was a pause, long enough for him to hope his daughter might defend him. But Skylar only sighed. "He means well, Evelyn. It's just, sometimes, he doesn't understand how things are now. Devon says I have to set boundaries if I want people to take me seriously." Arthur's throat tightened. The word struck him harder than any blow he'd ever taken on a job site. Boundaries. The same daughter who once sat on his shoulders to watch fireworks now wanted to build walls between them. Evelyn chuckled softly. "You're marrying up, dear. It's natural to shed the past. Don't let sentiment hold you back." The shears slipped from Arthur's hand and hit the soil with a dull thud. Startled, he reached down quickly, but the thorn caught his finger, slicing deep. A line of blood welled up, dark and bright against his skin. He stared at it, feeling the sting radiate through him, a physical echo of what had just pierced his heart. He pressed the wound against his palm, but it wouldn't stop bleeding. The petals around him were speckled red now, droplets mingling with the dew. He thought of Martha, how she'd once told him that roses drew strength from pain. "They bloom better after pruning," she'd said. The voices from the window drifted away, replaced by the sound of the car door slamming and the hum of the engine fading down the road. Arthur stayed kneeling among the roses long after they were gone. His hand throbbed, but he didn't move. The world felt smaller, quieter, as if even the garden had turned its face from him. When at last he stood, he looked up at the window where his daughter had once waved to him as a child. The curtains were drawn now, hiding whatever new life she was preparing behind glass and lace. He picked up the shears, wiped the blood onto his trousers, and turned toward the house. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside, the faint smell of cement clung to him again. But this time, it no longer smelled like work. It smelled like loss. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd water the roses again. But as he closed the door, the thought carried no comfort, only a quiet, hollow ache. The sky outside was still dark when Arthur opened his eyes. The clock on the wall glowed 4:12 a.m. The world was asleep, except for him. His body ached from yesterday's work in the garden, and the faint scent of roses still clung to his skin. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the shadows. For a long time, he didn't move. The day had come, the day his daughter would become a Coleman. The day he was supposed to walk her down the aisle, hand her over, and smile through the pain. But all he felt now was a strange, still emptiness, like something deep inside had stopped breathing. He walked to the kitchen and turned on the small lamp. The golden light revealed the table covered in bills, invoices, and receipts, his silent witnesses. The rose shears lay beside them, faintly rusted with a single smear of dried blood. He picked up the phone. Its dial tone buzzed steady and cold. The first call was to the Grand Magnolia estate. "Good morning," the woman said sleepily. "This is Arthur Wallace," he replied quietly. "I need to cancel the wedding scheduled for today." There was a pause. "Cancel? Sir, this is very last minute. We'd need." "Charge what you must," he interrupted. "Just make sure no one shows up." He hung up before she could respond. Next was the caterer. Then the florist. Then the band, the photographer, the dressmaker. With each call, his voice grew steadier. Not colder, but emptier. The click of the receiver after every conversation sounded like a nail being driven into a coffin. He didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just continued, one by one, erasing the day that had taken everything from him. By 6 o'clock, it was done. The sun had begun to rise, a thin orange line along the horizon. He stood at the window, watching light spill across the yard. The roses shone red in the morning mist, delicate and alive. Arthur sat at the table again and reached for a sheet of paper. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote. "Skylar, I couldn't give you more than myself. I hope that was enough. Dad." He folded the note carefully, placing it beside her bridal bouquet, the one she'd chosen weeks ago, still wrapped in white silk and baby's breath. In the quiet, he heard the distant whistle of a morning train. He had no plan, no destination. But the thought of leaving, of escaping the suffocating silence of this house, gave him a strange sense of peace. He put on his old jacket, the one still dusted with cement from a job long finished. The smell filled his lungs, grounding him. He took one last look around the room, at the roses through the window, the table of sacrifices, the ghost of his wife's laughter that still lingered somewhere in the walls. Then he stepped outside. The sun rose fully now, painting the yard in gold. His footsteps crunched softly against the gravel, steady and sure. Behind him, the phone sat silent, and for the first time in years, so did Arthur's heart. By the time the sun was high, the house on Willow Street was surrounded by confusion. Cars lined the gravel driveway, guests pacing with phones pressed to their ears, shouting into the morning air. The white chairs at the Grand Magnolia stood empty, the floral arch sagging beneath its weight of roses that would never be walked beneath. Arthur Wallace was gone. No one had seen him since dawn. His truck was missing, his phone left behind. On the kitchen table lay a single folded note and the bridal bouquet beside it, petals already beginning to brown at the edges. Skylar read the note once, twice, and then again, her hands shaking as she mouthed the words. "I couldn't give you more than myself. I hope that was enough." She didn't cry. She only stood there, cold and still, while voices swirled around her. "Unbelievable," Evelyn Coleman hissed, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Canceling a wedding without notice? That man's unstable." Devon's jaw was tight. "This will be all over the papers by noon. The Colemans humiliated by a construction worker's breakdown, that's what they'll say." "Devon," Skylar murmured, her voice small. "Maybe he's sick. Maybe he didn't mean." Evelyn cut her off. "He's an old man, dear. They lose control, make irrational choices. You'll have to fix this before it ruins your life." The words sank deep, colder than the morning air. Skylar folded the note carefully, hiding it in her clutch as if it were something shameful. By afternoon, the story had spread beyond their circle. Local blogs ran headlines. "Wealthy Coleman wedding cancelled. Bride's father disappears." Reporters camped outside the estate, cameras flashing as the family left through the side gate. Skylar kept her head down, face hidden behind dark glasses, while Evelyn whispered rehearsed sympathy for the microphones. That night, in the Coleman mansion's marble kitchen, Devon poured whiskey into 2 glasses. "It's simple," he said, sliding one toward Skylar. "You can file for guardianship. Say he's unwell, maybe showing signs of dementia. You'd get control of his assets. He can't run off and embarrass you again." Skylar hesitated. "You mean, Take his accounts? Not take, Evelyn corrected smoothly. Protect. He needs supervision. You'd be doing him a favor. The word favor hung in the air like smoke. Skylar stared into her drink, seeing her father's face in the amber reflection. Tired, gentle, and now, gone. Meanwhile, 100 miles away, Arthur sat in a roadside diner, staring out the window at the open fields. The waitress poured him coffee, but he barely touched it. A newspaper lay folded beside his plate, the headline shouting his daughter's disgrace. He wasn't angry yet. That would come later. For now, there was only a quiet ache and a growing certainty. They were already rewriting him into something he wasn't. Senile. Unstable. An old fool who ruined his daughter's life. He folded the paper, tucked it under his arm, and paid the bill. Outside, the world smelled of rain and diesel, far cleaner than the polished lies they were spreading in his name. Arthur didn't vanish to escape. He vanished to see the truth for what it was. And now that he'd seen it, he knew exactly what had to come next. 3 months passed before the summons reached him. A crisp white envelope with his name typed in bold. Arthur Wallace versus petition for guardianship. It arrived at the small post office box he'd rented under a false address, the only trace he allowed the world to have. He read it 3 times. Each word felt like a weight pressing on his chest. Petitioner. Skylar Coleman. His own daughter. When the court date came, Arthur wore his best suit, the same one he'd bought for the wedding that never happened. It hung loose on him now. The jacket smelled faintly of cedar and age. He took the early bus into Atlanta, his hands folded around the worn brim of his cap, eyes fixed on the gray morning beyond the window. The courtroom was colder than he expected, a sterile box of glass and light. Skylar sat on the opposite side, sleek in a tailored cream blouse, her hair coiled in an elegant twist. Devon and Evelyn flanked her like polished statues, all sympathy and poise. They didn't look at him. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Arthur followed slowly, his knees stiff. His lawyer, Mrs. Devine, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, leaned toward him. Just stay calm, Mr. Wallace. Truth has a strange way of blooming in the right season. Skylar's attorney spoke first, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Honor, my client only wishes to ensure her father's well-being. Mr. Wallace has demonstrated erratic behavior, canceling a major wedding event, liquidating assets, and disappearing without explanation. We fear cognitive decline. Arthur stared straight ahead. He could feel Skylar's gaze on him, not of anger, but of discomfort, as if she were staring at something she no longer recognized. When it was his turn, he stood, gripping the edge of the table. Your Honor, he said softly, I canceled that wedding because I realized it wasn't love. It was a transaction. And I wasn't willing to sell my daughter to buy her happiness. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Wallace, this isn't about emotions. It's about competency. Mrs. Devine rose then, her voice cutting through the tension. Then let's discuss competency, Your Honor, and integrity. May I submit Exhibit C? The clerk took a folder from her hand. Inside were copies of Arthur's bank withdrawals, property transfers, and, most damning, emails between Devon Coleman and Evelyn discussing the Wallace Pension Fund. Mrs. Devine continued, each word deliberate. While my client was pawning his late wife's ring and selling land to finance a wedding, the Coleman family had already filed preliminary inquiries with his bank, requesting authorization to manage future assets upon marital consolidation. Devon shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn's smile faltered. Skylar blinked, her face pale. Mrs. Devine pressed on. The so-called guardianship is not an act of concern. It's a strategy. Once deemed legally incompetent, Mr. Wallace's remaining funds, including a $180,000 pension reserve, would fall under his daughter's trusteeship, to be advised by her husband's firm. Convenient, isn't it? The judge turned toward Skylar. Mrs. Coleman, did you authorize these inquiries? Skylar stammered. I didn't know. Devon handled most of it. I just signed what they gave me. Devon whispered sharply. Don't answer that. But it was too late. Arthur felt the courtroom blur. not from confusion, but from the flood of something heavy and final. Betrayal had a sound, he realized, the hollow echo of truth landing in silence. The judge adjusted her glasses. Given the evidence, the court finds no reason to question Mr. Wallace's mental capacity. The petition is dismissed. Furthermore, the matter of potential financial misconduct by the Coleman family will be referred for investigation. The gavel struck once, a clean, echoing sound that felt like thunder. Arthur didn't look at Skylar as he left. He didn't need to. The image of her sitting there, pale, trembling, her perfect world cracking beneath her, would stay with him forever. Outside, the air was thick with the scent of rain and asphalt. He paused at the courthouse steps, watching the gray clouds part just enough to let a sliver of light through. Somewhere behind him, he heard Skylar call his name, but he kept walking. He had nothing left to say. In the distance, a small garden bloomed beside the courthouse, overgrown, untended. Arthur stopped for a moment and stared at it. Roses fighting to grow through concrete. The sight almost made him smile. Tomorrow, he thought, he would visit his own garden again. But this time, not to water it, only to say goodbye. The bus ride back to Willow Street was long and silent. Arthur sat by the window, his reflection faint in the glass. An old man in a borrowed suit, the lines on his face deeper than before, but his eyes clearer. The courthouse still echoed in his mind. The gavel's strike, the shock on Skylar's face, the quiet satisfaction that justice, at least in part, had been served. But beneath the vindication was something else, a hollow ache that no verdict could fill. He had won the case, but he had lost the one person he had built his life for. When the bus finally stopped, he stepped onto the gravel shoulder, feeling the air grow familiar again, the smell of dust, diesel, and faintly, cement. It was the scent of his own history, honest and unpretentious. He walked the rest of the way home, the sun dipping behind the rooftops, the light spilling across the cracked driveway like liquid gold. The house stood quiet, just as he'd left it. The roses in the garden had wilted, their petals scattered like memories across the soil. He set his jacket on the porch railing and went inside. The ticking clock still kept time, the same as before, indifferent to what had changed. He wandered to the back shed, his sanctuary, his confession booth. The familiar scent met him immediately. Cement dust, wood shavings, oil. It filled the air, wrapping around him like an old friend. For months, that smell had felt like a curse, proof that he belonged to a world Skylar had outgrown. But now it felt like truth. He ran his fingers across the workbench, the grooves worn smooth from decades of use. In the corner sat an old bag of cement mix, half empty, still good. He tore it open, poured the powder into a bucket, and began to stir it with water. The sound, the scrape of metal against stone, was steady, rhythmic, familiar. As he worked, his breathing evened out. His thoughts drifted to Martha, her laughter, her patience, the way she'd smell of soap and lilacs after tending the garden. She had believed in building things that lasted. He smiled faintly. When the mixture was ready, he set a wooden mold on the workbench. Slowly, carefully, he poured the cement into it, smoothing the surface with the edge of his trowel. The gray paste gleamed under the flickering light. He picked up a small stick and began to carve into the wet cement. His hand trembled, but the letters formed cleanly. Martha Wallace. He paused, then added beneath it, smaller, almost hesitant. Skylar. Not as an offering, but as a truth. A reminder that love, even broken, still left its mark. The smell of cement filled the shed, sharp and grounding. It clung to his hands, his clothes, his skin. This time, he didn't try to wash it away. It wasn't shame anymore, it was proof of what he'd built, what he'd survived. When the stone was set, he carried it out to the garden. The evening sky had turned violet, the air cool and still. He placed the slab at the base of the largest rose bush, Martha's favorite, and brushed the dirt gently from its edges. The roses above it were nearly gone now, petals curling inward like closed hands. He knelt beside them, his knees pressing into the damp earth. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "She'll bloom again." He stayed there until the first stars appeared, then rose slowly, dusting off his trousers. His hands were gray with cement, But he didn't mind. For the first time in years, they looked whole again. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would clean the shed, maybe patch the porch steps. The work would keep him steady. Behind him, the wet cement began to harden in the cool night air, solid, silent, and permanent. The knock came just after sunset. Arthur was sitting by the porch, a cup of lukewarm tea in his hands, watching the cement stone dry beneath the roses. The air smelled of rain and earth, the scent of something ending and beginning at once. He didn't expect anyone. No one came here anymore. The knock came again, softer this time. He rose slowly, his joints stiff, and opened the door. Skylar stood there. Her perfect curls were gone, her hair pinned back hastily. The faint glamour that had once followed her, perfume, confidence, polish, was replaced by something raw. Her eyes were red, rimmed with sleeplessness. The silence between them stretched like a wound. "Dad," she whispered. He didn't move aside, but he didn't close the door either. She took that as permission and stepped in. The house smelled faintly of dust and cement. Her gaze traveled over the worn furniture, the old photographs, the scattered tools. Everything she'd once found embarrassing now looked sacred. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, voice trembling. "They've left me. Devon, Evelyn. They disappeared after the investigation started. Their accounts are frozen, their lawyers won't answer my calls." Arthur set his cup down quietly. "You'll be all right," he said. His tone was calm, not cruel, just distant. She shook her head. "No, I won't. I ruined everything." Tears welled up. "You were right. They used me, Dad. I let them. I thought marrying Devon would make me someone. I thought I could make you proud by being more than what we were." Arthur looked at her then, really looked, at the daughter he'd carried on his shoulders, taught to ride a bike, built tree houses for in the summer heat. All of that felt both yesterday and a lifetime ago. She reached for him, but he didn't move. "Please say something," she begged. "I can't stand this silence." He turned away and walked toward the garden door. The hinges creaked softly as he opened it. She followed, her heels sinking into the damp earth. The air outside was cool, scented with soil and wilted roses. He stopped before the new stone under the rose bush. The cement had set fully now, gray and unyielding. The names carved into it gleamed faintly under the porch light. Martha Wallace. And beneath it, smaller, fragile, Skylar. She stared at it, her breath catching. The line of her name was uneven, a small crack running through the middle. She touched it gently, fingertips trembling. "You made this?" she asked. Arthur nodded once. "It's not perfect," he said. "But it'll last." She broke then, knees buckling, shoulders shaking, tears falling freely. "I don't deserve that," she whispered. "Not my name. Not your forgiveness." Arthur said nothing. He simply stood beside her, the sound of the night filling the space between them. Crickets, distant thunder, the faint hum of life continuing. Skylar pressed her hand over the carved letters, smearing dirt across her palm. "I just wanted to be worth something," she sobbed. Arthur looked down at his hands, still gray from the cement. "You were," he said quietly. "You just forgot." She looked up at him, eyes wide, a flicker of hope, or maybe grief. He turned back toward the house, leaving her kneeling by the stone, her tears darkening the soil. Months had slipped by like autumn leaves carried off by a cold wind. Skylar's world, once vibrant and full of promise, had faded into muted grays. The scandal that had consumed her family left her reputation shattered, her name whispered in hushed tones wherever she went. The friends she once had vanished like smoke, and doors she thought would always be open now slammed shut without warning. Skylar lived in a small, rented apartment in the city's forgotten edges, where the streets were cracked and the streetlights flickered weakly at night. Every morning, she forced herself out of bed, moving through the motions, applying for jobs, answering curt rejection emails, and avoiding the mirror that reflected a stranger's eyes back at her. The guilt weighed heavy, but it was the loneliness that carved the deepest wounds. News of Devon's flight abroad trickled through her like a bitter frost. He had vanished, leaving behind charges of fraud and betrayal that cemented the ruin of their family name. The headline screamed his disgrace, but Schuyler knew the truth was far more tangled, threads of deception woven through years of secrets. His departure was a cruel final act, a severing of ties she never thought possible. Arthur, her father, had disappeared from their lives entirely. The grand house where she had grown up was sold quietly, without fanfare or announcements. No more the sprawling estate with its manicured gardens and echoing halls. Instead, Arthur had chosen a quiet seaside town far away from the relentless judgment of the city. In that peaceful retreat, Arthur found solace tending a small garden by his modest cottage. There were no roses there now, no red petals bursting with life and passion. Instead, he planted lilies, their pale, graceful blooms a gentle tribute to Schuyler's lost innocence and the fragile beauty she once embodied. The lilies swayed softly in the salty breeze, a quiet reminder of hope amidst the wreckage. Arthur's heart was heavy, a weathered map of grief and regret. Yet, amid the solitude, there was a tentative peace. The garden gave him something to nurture, a way to hold on to the pieces of his family that still mattered, even as the world seemed to crumble around them. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, Arthur would sit on his porch, watching the lilies dance. He thought of Schuyler, her struggles, her resilience, and the faint glimmers of strength that still flickered within her. He knew their journey was far from over, and though the wounds were deep, the possibility of healing remained. The hollow garden was more than a refuge. It was a symbol of endurance. And as the sea whispered secrets to the shore, so too did the garden promise new beginnings. If you'd like, I can help craft the next chapter to continue this thread. The months following Arthur's passing were heavy with silence. Schuyler sat in the dim light of her small apartment, the letter resting on her lap like a fragile relic. It had arrived unexpectedly, sealed in an envelope worn from travel, bearing no return address, only her name, written in her father's familiar, uneven script. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter, the paper rough and faintly scented with salt and earth, the lingering essence of the seaside garden where Arthur had spent his final days. She began to read. The smell of cement is the smell of hands that built, not destroyed. I hope one day you remember that. The word struck her like a quiet thunderclap, simple but profound. The cement, cold, unyielding, was not a symbol of ruin or confinement but a testament to creation. Hands calloused by labor, by care, by hope. Arthur's words breathed life into that stark image, transforming it into a metaphor for endurance. Schuyler's gaze drifted beyond the letter, to the window where dusk filtered through. The world outside felt vast and unyielding, yet inside her, a fragile ember flickered, a glimmer of something she thought lost forever. The garden in her memory stirred vividly, the lilies swaying in the ocean breeze, the quiet peace of Arthur's new life, and most poignantly, the roses. Those roses! She recalled the countless afternoons Arthur had spent beneath her bedroom window, tending to them with unwavering devotion. Red petals unfurling like small flames, a quiet rebellion against the shadow that had crept into their lives. The roses had been a promise, silent, persistent, that beauty and hope could flourish even in the darkest soil. Now, standing before the old house long sold, Schuyler traced her fingers along the wrought iron gate, rusted but resilient. The garden had changed, yet it was alive. Vibrant roses bloomed boldly once again, climbing the trellis in a riot of scarlet and pink. They were the same roses Arthur had watered, tended, and loved. A testament that even after the harshest winters, life could renew itself. She stepped inside the garden's embrace, the scent of roses wrapping around her like a long-forgotten melody. The air was thick with memories, whispers of laughter, moments stolen in quiet afternoons, and the weight of unspoken apologies. Her eyes filled with tears, not only of grief but of a gentle acceptance. This letter, this garden, they were Arthur's final gift, a bridge between what had been lost and what might still be salvaged. Not redemption in the grand, sweeping sense, but a quiet, enduring permanence, a softer kind of healing that did not erase the scars but gave them space to exist. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of amber and rose, Schuyler sank to a weathered bench beneath the climbing blooms. She read the letter again, each word sinking deeper, settling like seeds in the soil of her heart. The story that had begun with betrayal, with fractured bonds and shattered dreams, was ending not with triumphant restoration, but with something more honest. The acceptance of loss, the fragile beauty of memory, and the knowledge that some wounds may never fully heal, and yet life, stubborn and relentless, persists. The camera of her mind's eye pulled back slowly, taking in the garden's quiet grandeur, the roses glowing softly beneath the twilight sky, their petals unfurling in defiance of the past. Arthur's words echoed in the stillness, a whispered promise that creation, not destruction, was the legacy worth holding on to. And in that moment, as night fell gently around her, Skylar understood. The story was never about undoing the damage, but about learning to live with it. To nurture the fragile roses in the hollow garden of her heart. The end was not an end at all, but the beginning of a new kind of quiet. If you'd like, I can help craft what might come next or discuss the story's themes in more depth.